Welcome to the debate. Today we turn our attention to the World Defense Show 2026 in Riyadh, specifically focusing on a development that fundamentally alters the strategic calculus of South Asia and the Indian Ocean. I'm speaking about the unveiling of the Smash hypersonic missile by Pakistan's Global Industrial and Defense Solutions. The foundation of our discussion today is the essay, Power as Trust, Pakistan's Smash Missile and Islamic Defense Ethics, authored by Sami al-Malik. I will be arguing, in line with Sami al-Malik's thesis, that this missile represents a necessary synthesis of Islamic ethical restraint and modern technological self-reliance, a civilizational declaration where power is subordinated to moral responsibility.
And I will be taking the opposing perspective. While the engineering achievement is undeniable, the fundamental nature of hypersonic weaponry, its velocity, its compression of time, inherently challenges a philosophical claim that such power can guarantee peace. I argue that the technology's capacity for strategic surprise creates an inherently destabilizing environment, regardless of the ethical intent behind its creation.
To begin, we must examine the core of Sami al-Malik's argument. He posits that the Smash missile signifies a monumental paradigm shift. It is the transition of a nation from being a mere consumer of imported military hardware to a dignified creator. Malik frames this as a considered knock upon the door of history. He roots this entirely in the Qur'anic injunction, found in chapter 8, verse 60, which mandates the preparation of force. But the crucial distinction here is that this preparation is not for aggression, it is a charter for deterrence. In this framework, the weapon safeguards sovereignty, placing power strictly under the dominion of ethics and knowledge.
I acknowledge the transition from consumer to architect. It is a vital step for any state's sovereignty. However, we must critically evaluate this concept of an ethics of defense when applied to this specific machinery. We are talking about hypersonic technology. The deployment of such systems introduces what we call strategic surprise. It compresses the reaction times of an adversary down to a terrifyingly narrow margin.
Yes, the speed is unprecedented in the region.
Exactly. And Sami al-Malik writes about war now being waged in invisible theaters of cognition. But I must ask, how can prudence govern decision-making when the window for cognition is reduced to mere seconds? The stated intent is defensive, yes, but the capability, Mach 2 plus terminal velocity, is overtly offensive. It creates a tension within the power as trust framework that is exceedingly difficult to resolve.
But resolving that tension requires us to fully understand what is meant by trust. Sami al-Malik expands extensively on the concept of amanah.
The holding of power as a sacred stewardship.
Precisely. Amanah dictates that power is not a possession for martial exuberance or ostentation. It is a measured affirmation of responsibility. Malik draws a direct historical line here. He looks back to the fleets of Andalusia and the maritime reach of the Ottoman Caliphate. In those eras, maritime power was conceptualized as a theater of stewardship, an instrument to protect against injustice. The SMS-AMIS missile, in its anti-ship role, is presented as the modern heir to that exact tradition. The weapon is legitimized by its purpose, to preserve peace and order in contested waters.
The historical lineage is elegantly drawn, but, we have to look at the physical reality of the present. Applying the maritime ethics of an Ottoman galleon to modern hypervelocity warfare requires quite a leap. The physics of the SMH missile are engineered for force and finality. It is designed to penetrate layered, modern defensive shields with a near-vertical terminal attack profile. When a weapon is purposefully built to render an adversary's defense architecture obsolete, is that stewardship? Or is it simply the pursuit of absolute kinetic dominance?
Dominance is a strong word. I would frame it as the restoration of equilibrium. If you lack the capability to penetrate a shield, you invite coercion.
But how does a state maintain moral discipline when the technology itself practically demands rapid preemptive use? By making the opponent's defenses precarious, you do not just secure your own borders, you fundamentally terrify your neighbors. That dynamic inherently invites escalation rather than stewardship.
I think you might be overlooking the nuance in the technical specifications, which Samayullah Malik interprets as philosophical metaphors for restraint. Consider the missile's dual-role capability. GIDS has engineered a single platform using a single-stage, dual-thrust solid rocket motor that can engage both maritime and terrestrial targets.
It is an impressive consolidation of logistics, certainly.
It is more than logistics. Malik views this through the lens of intellectual economy and frugality. By utilizing one platform across two domains, there is a massive reduction in waste and expenditure. He connects this directly to the Islamic principle of avoiding extravagance, or israf. It demonstrates a disciplined, restrained approach to military-industrial development. Furthermore, we must look at the precision. The system boasts a circular error probable, a CEP, of less than 10 meters for maritime targets and 15 meters for land.
I concede the precision is remarkable.
And that precision is the physical manifestation of an ethical doctrine. Malik argues it ensures action is defined, proportionate, and purposeful. It specifically avoids indiscriminate destruction. It targets the military node, not the populace.
Economy in warfare, however, is invariably tied to lethality. We must be intellectually honest about the numbers detailed in the text. The anti-ship variant carries a 384-kilogram warhead. The land attack variant carries a massive 444-kilogram warhead.
The payloads are indeed substantial.
Substantial is perhaps an understatement. While simplicity of design is a virtue in engineering, elevating it to a moral virtue feels a bit strained. The increase in payload for the land variant indicates a doctrine of decisive engagement. You do not deliver over 400 kilograms of high explosive to simply send a diplomatic signal. That is designed for the total negation of the target. The philosophy may preach restraint, but the hardware is undeniably calibrated for devastation.
But deterrence cannot exist without the credible threat of decisive engagement. If the sword has no edge, it deters no wolves. This brings us to a central pillar of Samayullah Malik's treatise, the absolute necessity of strategic autonomy in the global order. Malik asserts that esteem in the modern era is reserved exclusively for those who are self-reliant.
A rather Palmerstonian view of the world, I must say.
And a necessary one for a sovereign state. By shifting from a purveyor of imported hardware to an indigenous architect, Pakistan ceases to rely on borrowed doctrines. If your defensive architecture is leased from a foreign power, your sovereignty is fundamentally compromised. Malik's argument is that true dignified station in the international community is only achieved through the equilibrium of power and principle. You cannot hold power as a trust if you do not actually own the power. I do not dispute that self-reliance is the bedrock of sovereignty. But introducing this specific capability into the volatile theaters of the Middle East and South Asia carries profound global implications. Samayullah Malik explicitly mentions the appetite of the global defense market for these weapons. The SMAsh missile is not just a shield for Pakistan, it is an exportable commodity.
It represents an offering of responsible deterrence to allied nations.
But there is the crux of the proliferation dilemma. If you export this trust, this physical missile, how do you guarantee the buyer shares your Islamic conception of responsible deterrence? You can export the HDGNS assistive inertial navigation. You can export the active radar seeker. You cannot box up an export conscience. Once that technology enters the global stream, it is at the mercy of geopolitics, far beyond the intellectual poise Malik describes.
Every technology carries the risk of misuse, from the printing press to the atom. But within its immediate strategic context, Malik is clear. The missile serves as a calibrated deterrence. By possessing the means to bypass defensive shields, it forestalls conflict. It ensures the cost of aggression is unacceptably high.
I would argue it alters the calculus in a much more dangerous direction. Malik himself notes that war involves diminishing the enemy's window of reaction. When you deploy hypersonic anti-ship missiles with a range of 290 kilometers in the Indian Ocean, you are creating a hair-trigger reality. A naval commander detects a launch and has only seconds to determine if it is a drill, an anomaly, or a lethal strike.
The burden of rapid assessment is precisely what deters the initial aggression.
Or it provokes a preemptive strike out of sheer paranoia. The text argues for preparedness without provocation, but the mere deployment of Mach 2 plus anti-ship missiles alters the entire theater. It forces adversaries to maintain an aggressive, forward-leaning posture. It may secure the immediate coastline, but it undeniably destabilizes the broader maritime environment. I respectfully disagree with the premise that vulnerability somehow breeds stability. Samiullah Malik's text suggests that in a region characterized by an uneasy geographical embrace, an imbalance of capability invites adventurism. The SMASH system is a strategic and intellectual pronouncement. It proves that modern technological ambition and classical Islamic thought are not mutually exclusive. They are, in fact, allies. When capability is joined to conscience, as he argues, power truly becomes a guardian of peace.
It is undoubtedly an elegant intellectual framework, and the convergence of the guidance systems and the propulsion that Malik details, it represents a profound mastery of physics. But I remain skeptical that the systemic risks of hypersonic velocity can be fully mitigated by philosophy. The door of history he mentions opens into a deeply unpredictable space. The ultimate test of this amanah will not be found in the engineering specs, but in the restraint shown during an actual geopolitical crisis.
That is truth every sovereign power must confront. As we conclude, it is clear that Samiullah Malik has provided a profoundly serious framework for evaluating defense technology. He asks us to look beyond the cold arithmetic of propulsion and payload and to consider the moral station of the state wielding the weapon.
Indeed, it forces the strategic community to engage with epistemology and ethics rather than merely debating trajectory and range. We agree that power must be tethered to principle, even if we diverge on whether this specific technology allows for such restraint.
A tension that will undoubtedly define the geopolitical landscape for decades to come. Thank you to our listeners for joining us as we explored the intricate arguments laid out by Samiullah Malik. We leave it to you to weigh the evidence and the philosophy presented today. Goodbye.